My name is Morgan Crawford, 32, founder of Data Shield. Walking into my parents' suburban home for what I thought was a casual dinner, I immediately sensed something was off. Mom's worried glances. Dad's too firm handshake. My siblings' awkward smiles. "We're here to discuss your struggling company," Mom said sympathetically, squeezing my hand. My brother Kyle choked on his coffee, staring at his phone. "Why is your company valued at $4 billion on Bloomberg?" The room fell silent as everyone froze. "Where are you watching from today?" Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had family doubt your dreams. Trust me, what happens next is worth sticking around for. Growing up in Oak Ridge, Minnesota, I was raised in a family that valued security above all else. My parents, Barbara and Richard Crawford, built their entire lives around stability. Dad worked for the same insurance company for 40 years, climbing the corporate ladder methodically. Mom taught third grade at the local elementary school until retirement. They bought the same model car every 8 years, vacationed at the same lake cabin every summer, and preached the gospel of 401(k)s and pension plans at every opportunity. My older brother Kyle followed their blueprint perfectly. He studied accounting at the State University, married his college sweetheart Melissa, and now works for one of the Big Four accounting firms. He has 2 kids, a golden retriever, and a 4-bedroom house in a good school district. Every Christmas, my parents beam with pride when Kyle discusses his latest promotion or retirement contribution increase. My sister Allison went to medical school, just as my parents had always dreamed. She's now a successful pediatrician with a thriving practice in Minneapolis. She drives a sensible luxury car, lives in an elegant townhouse, and goes to wine tastings with other doctors on weekends. My parents love introducing her as our daughter, Dr. Crawford, at community events. Then there was me. From childhood, I asked too many questions. Took apart household electronics to see how they worked and dreamed of building something new. While Kyle played it safe and Allison followed the prescribed path, I was always the family wild card. When I announced my business major in college, my parents were cautiously supportive. At least it wasn't art or philosophy. But college changed everything for me. I discovered computer science in my sophomore year and became obsessed with data systems and privacy technology. My professors noticed my unusual approach to problem solving, and one encouraged me to enter the National Hackathon Championship during my junior year. That's where I met Rachel Goldstein, my future business partner. We were paired randomly during the event. 2 strangers with complementary skills. Rachel was a brilliant programmer with a background in cryptography, while I excelled at system architecture and user experience. We stayed up for 48 hours straight and created a prototype privacy tool that won second place overall. More importantly, we discovered that we worked together like we'd been coding side by side for years. After graduation, I was accepted into a prestigious MBA program, making my parents finally feel like I was on a sensible path. They told all their friends that their daughter was getting her master's degree in business, conveniently leaving out that I was simultaneously working on a startup idea with Rachel. 3 months into the program, I dropped out to focus full-time on what would become Data Shield. The family intervention that followed was epic. Dad paced around the living room, waving his hands and listing all the successful executives who had MBAs. Mom cried about wasted potential and student loans. Kyle made spreadsheets showing the statistical improbability of startup success. Allison sent me links to business school reapplication forms. "You're throwing your life away on a pipe dream," Dad had said that night. Rachel and I launched Data Shield with our combined savings of $28,000. Our idea was revolutionary, but difficult to explain to non-technical people. A privacy-focused data analytics platform that allowed companies to gain insights from their customer data without actually accessing individual information. It solved the growing tension between data-driven business decisions and increasing privacy regulations. For the first 18 months, we worked out of my tiny studio apartment. I slept on a pull-out couch and converted the only actual room into our office. We lived on ramen noodles, coffee, and determination. When I went home for holidays, I dodged questions about my company and changed the subject whenever possible. "How's your little computer project going?" my mother would ask. In the same tone, she might inquire about a child's macaroni art. "It's fine, Mom. Still working on it," I'd reply, then quickly ask Allison about her latest medical conference. What my family didn't know was that 6 months after launching, Rachel and I had secured our first major client, a Fortune 500 healthcare company that needed exactly our solution. 3 months after that, we had 5 enterprise clients. By the end of our first year, we'd moved into a real office and hired our first employees. The decision to keep our success secret wasn't just personal, it was strategic. Our technology was groundbreaking, and we were racing against potential competitors with deeper pockets. The privacy tech space was heating up, and we knew that flying under the radar gave us an advantage. No press releases, no social media buzz, no industry conference keynotes. We let our clients find us through word of mouth and focused obsessively on building our product. But there was also a personal element to my secrecy. After years of having my ambitions dismissed by my family, part of me wanted to succeed completely on my own terms before revealing anything. I wanted to prove beyond any doubt that I'd made the right choice. I fantasized about the moment I could finally show them that my pipe dream had become something extraordinary. The plan was to keep quiet until our IPO, which we'd been preparing for in stealth mode. Everything was on track for the big reveal, until that family dinner changed everything. The aroma of my mother's special lasagna, 4 cheeses with homemade sauce, filled the dining room as I took my seat at the family table. It was my favorite comfort food growing up, which should have been my first clue that something was amiss. Mom only made her special lasagna for celebrations or consolations. "I made your favorite," she said, squeezing my shoulder as she placed the massive ceramic dish on the table. "I thought you might need something special tonight." I glanced around the dining room, taking in the careful seating arrangement. In our family, seating was never random. Mom had placed me at the middle of the long side of the table, the hot seat position we all recognized from previous family discussions. My father sat at the head of the table, a position of authority he never relinquished. Kyle was directly across from me, while Allison sat to my right. My Aunt Susan and Uncle Frank had been invited too, sitting at the far end near my father. The message was clear. This was an all-hands-on-deck situation. The pitying glances started during the salad course. Aunt Susan asked about my health and well-being, with the delicate tone usually reserved for terminal illness patients. Uncle Frank inquired if I was keeping busy, with the same sympathetic head tilt he'd used at my grandfather's funeral. Every few minutes, someone would whisper something to someone else, then quickly smile at me when they noticed I was watching. Dad waited until Mom served the lasagna to begin his speech. He cleared his throat, the universal Richard Crawford signal that a lecture was imminent. "Morgan, we've asked you here tonight because we're concerned," he began, folding his hands on the table. "As your family, we have a responsibility to step in when we see someone we love making choices that could impact their future." I took a bite of lasagna to hide my confusion. What exactly did they think was happening in my life? "Running a business is difficult," he continued, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he'd perfected over 4 decades in middle management. "Statistics show that most startups fail within the first 3 years. That's not an opinion. That's a fact." Kyle nodded supportively, always ready to back up any statement involving statistics. "Your brother has prepared some figures," Dad said, nodding to Kyle, who promptly pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "The tech sector specifically has a 63% failure rate for startups," Kyle recited, not looking up from his notes. "And companies with female founders receive less than 3% of venture capital funding." "We're not saying this to discourage you," Mom interjected, misreading my expression. "We just want you to be realistic." Dad continued as if Mom hadn't spoken. "I've always taught you kids about responsibility. When I was your age, I was already a senior account manager with a company retirement plan." Kyle here made manager by 30. Kyle straightened his tie slightly at the mention. "There's no shame in recognizing when something isn't working," Dad said, his voice softening in what I recognized as his closing argument tone. In fact, it takes courage to change course. That's why I took the liberty of speaking with Jim Nelson at Midwest Insurance Group. They have an opening in their digital marketing department. Jim said he'd be happy to interview you as a courtesy to me. My jaw clenched so tight I could feel a headache forming at my temples. I pushed the lasagna around on my plate, appetite completely gone. Before I could respond, Mom jumped in with her emotional appeal, eyes already glistening with unshed tears. Honey, we're just worried about you. You've lost weight. And you always look so tired when we see you. Is your apartment still safe? That neighborhood seemed so questionable when we helped you move in. What she didn't know is that I had moved out of that starter apartment over 2 years ago. I now owned a loft in the city's most exclusive district, though I rarely spent time there. Given my work schedule, I was reading about that young man who founded that fitness app company, Mom continued. He lost everything and had to move back in with his parents at 35. His story was in People magazine. She reached across the table to pat my hand. Your old room is exactly as you left it. You could stay as long as you need to regroup. Allison, never one to miss an opportunity to offer practical advice, jumped in. I have a patient whose mother works in hospital administration at Abbott Northwestern. It's a growing field with great benefits. I already mentioned you to her, and she said their HR department is always looking for people with business backgrounds. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling. I can help you update your LinkedIn profile tonight. It's all about keywords these days. My colleague just hired a new office manager using LinkedIn's premium recruiting tools. I sat there, speechless, as my family continued planning my professional rehabilitation. Uncle Frank suggested I look into government jobs for their stability. Aunt Susan wondered aloud if I had considered teaching business at a community college. Kyle began explaining the process of declaring business bankruptcy, just in case it came to that. The pressure in my chest built with each well-intentioned but completely misguided suggestion. Flashbacks of similar moments throughout my life flickered through my mind, Dad explaining why my science fair project on data encryption was too complicated when I was 12. Mom suggesting I focus on more practical subjects than computer programming in high school, Kyle sending me articles about tech industry sexism when I started Data Shield. My family had always responded to my ambitions with some combination of confusion, concern, and subtle discouragement, all wrapped in the guise of loving protection. They weren't trying to hurt me. In their minds, they were saving me from inevitable disappointment. I'd almost worked up the courage to interrupt the intervention when I noticed Kyle's strange behavior. Throughout dinner, he'd been checking his phone under the table with increasing frequency. His expression had shifted from sympathy to confusion to shock. Now he was staring openly at his screen, mouth slightly open, completely ignoring Dad's ongoing lecture about the importance of employer-matched 401k contributions. Dad, hold on, Kyle interrupted, an unprecedented breach of family dinner protocol. Dad stopped mid-sentence, eyebrows raised in surprise. Kyle looked up from his phone, eyes wide, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Morgan, why is your picture on Bloomberg's website right now? The room fell silent. All eyes shifted from Kyle to me. What are you talking about? I asked, my heart suddenly pounding. Kyle turned his phone around, displaying the screen for everyone to see. The bold headline read, Privacy Unicorn Data Shield valued at $4 billion ahead of IPO. Below it was a photo of me from a private investor meeting 6 months ago, captioned Morgan Crawford, elusive founder and CEO of privacy tech sensation Data Shield. It says here, Kyle continued, scanning the article, that Data Shield has revolutionized data privacy technology and is preparing for one of the most anticipated IPOs of the year. It says you've raised over $200 million in venture funding while maintaining founder control of the company. Mom gasped. Dad's fork clattered against his plate. Allison reached for Kyle's phone, pulling it closer to read the screen herself. Is this real? She demanded, looking up at me. The article wasn't supposed to be published yet. Our PR team had been working with select financial publications for post-IPO coverage, but everything was embargoed until the official announcement next week. Someone had jumped the gun. Morgan? Dad's voice had lost its lecturing tone, replaced by genuine confusion. The secret I'd kept for nearly 4 years was suddenly exposed in the most public and awkward way possible. A complex mix of emotions washed over me: relief that I no longer had to hide my success, anger at the premature article, pride in seeing my company recognized, and a growing knot of resentment at having to sit through a family intervention I never needed. "Yes, it's real," I finally said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Data Shield is valued at $4 billion. We're preparing for our IPO next week." Mom's hand flew to her mouth. "4 billion? With a B." Aunt Susan made a sound between a gasp and a squeak. Uncle Frank stared at me like I'd suddenly sprouted a second head. Carl kept scrolling through the article, reading snippets aloud. "Data Shield's revolutionary approach to privacy-preserving analytics has attracted major clients, including 3 of the largest healthcare providers in the country and at least a dozen Fortune 500 companies." Crawford, who founded the company with Rachel Goldstein after dropping out of business school, has maintained a deliberately low profile. Industry insiders call Data Shield's technology at least 5 years ahead of the nearest competitor. "I don't understand," Dad said, his voice uncharacteristically small. "If your company is successful, why did you let us believe you were struggling?" All eyes were on me again, but the looks of pity had transformed into something else entirely: shock, confusion, and in some cases, the beginnings of calculation. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. How could I explain years of strategic secrecy and personal motivation in a way my family would understand? "The company needed to stay under the radar during development," I began. "Our competitive advantage depended on secrecy while we built our technology and patent portfolio. It wasn't just my secret to share." This was true, but not the whole truth. I could have told my immediate family while swearing them to secrecy. Rachel had told her parents and sister over a year ago. "So all this time," Allison said slowly, "when we thought you were barely getting by in that tiny apartment, working on some doomed startup, I was building a multi-billion-dollar company." I finished for her. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth after years of downplaying my work around my family. The room erupted with reactions. Mom started crying, whether from happiness or shock wasn't clear. Dad peppered me with basic questions about the business that showed how little he had ever understood about what I actually did. Kyle was frantically searching for more articles about Data Shield on his phone. Allison sat back in her chair, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Uncle Frank, never one for subtlety, cut right to the chase. "So you're going to be rich, then?" "Really rich." Before I could answer, the flood of follow-up questions began. "Why didn't you tell us? How could you let us worry all this time? Was this some kind of joke to you? Are you really worth billions now?" Their questions carried accusations, hurt, and a rapidly shifting family dynamic as they tried to process that the person they'd gathered to save was actually more financially successful than all of them combined. I tried to explain, starting with the business reasons for our stealth strategy, but I could feel my composure cracking as years of suppressed feelings rose to the surface. Every dismissive comment, every doubting look, every well-meaning suggestion that I give up and get a real job played back in my mind as I watched my family's attitudes transform before my eyes. Dad, who minutes ago had been lecturing me about responsibility, was suddenly offering to introduce me to his golf buddies who were always looking for investment opportunities. Mom was simultaneously expressing pride and hurt feelings about being kept in the dark. Allison, competitive as ever, was comparing my success to her medical practice in terms barely disguised as congratulations. The most jarring shift came from extended family members who had barely shown interest in my career before. Aunt Susan began asking inappropriately specific questions about my net worth, while Uncle Frank launched into a pitch about my cousin's revolutionary food delivery app that just needed a small investment to scale. The tension in the room built until I couldn't take it anymore. Years of bottled-up resentment burst through. "Do you want to know the real reason I never told you about my company's success?" I said, my voice rising. "Because none of you ever believed in me or what I was building. You treated my business like it was a hobby or a phase I was going through. You've spent years pitying me, talking down to me and waiting for me to fail so you could swoop in with your "I told you so" and your backup plans. The room fell silent again, this time with the heavy discomfort of exposed truth. "Morgan, that's not fair," Dad started, but I was beyond stopping. "Isn't it? When I started Data Shield, you told me I was throwing my life away on a pipe dream. When I worked 18-hour days to build something I believed in, you sent me job listings. When I needed support, you gave me contingency plans for failure." Memories poured out, years of small dismissals and undermining comments. The time Dad referred to my company as Morgan's little project at Thanksgiving dinner. Mom asking when I was going to get a stable job with benefits every time I called home. Kyle's statistical analyses of startup failure rates sent as helpful information. I stood up, napkin thrown on the table. "I need some air," I said, and walked out of the dining room, through the kitchen, and out the back door into the yard where I'd grown up. I wasn't alone in the backyard for long. The sliding glass door opened behind me, and I heard multiple sets of footsteps on the deck. Taking a deep breath, I turned to face my family. Dad spoke first, his tone a mixture of confusion and indignation. "Morgan, what just happened in there? Why would you keep something like this from your own family?" Mom stood beside him, eyes red from crying. "We've always supported you, honey. Always. How could you think otherwise?" I laughed, a short, sharp sound lacking any humor. "Supported me? By constantly questioning my choices? By treating my career like it was a phase I needed to outgrow." Kyle stepped forward, phone still in hand. "I just read that Data Shield has over 200 employees. You've been running a company that size, and you never said a word to us. Why would I?" I shot back. "So you could send me more articles about startup failure statistics?" Kyle had the decency to look embarrassed. "Those were meant to be helpful." "They weren't," I said flatly. Allison, arms crossed tightly across her chest, couldn't contain herself any longer. "So while we've all been worrying about you, thinking you were struggling, you've been secretly building some tech empire? Do you have any idea how that makes us feel? Like we're jokes to you." "That's not what this was about," I said. "Then what was it about?" Dad demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you deliberately misled your family for years. We're not mind readers, Morgan. How were we supposed to know you were successful if you never told us? Maybe by trusting that I knew what I was doing? By believing I was capable of success instead of constantly preparing me for failure." Mom stepped between us, always the peacemaker. "Nobody thought you would fail, sweetheart. We were just concerned about you. The tech industry is so volatile, and we've read so many stories about young people burning out." "I'm not young people, Mom. I'm your daughter. And I'm good at what I do. Really good. But none of you ever wanted to understand that." Uncle Frank, never one for emotional nuance, cut through the tension with the bluntness of a sledgehammer. "So, are you going public with this company? Will you be able to sell your shares right away? My buddy's son went through an IPO last year and made a killing." Aunt Susan nudged him with her elbow, but her own curiosity was evident. "We're just so surprised, Morgan. And proud, of course. Very proud. I always told your mother you were the smart one in the family." I bit back a retort, knowing full well Aunt Susan had referred to me as the one with the computer hobby for years. The conversation was quickly devolving as my family members' reactions oscillated between hurt feelings about being kept in the dark and transparent interest in the financial implications of my success. Dad, ever the businessman, shifted into networking mode. "You know, I play golf with Jim Harrington from First Regional Bank. If you need any banking connections for your IPO, I'd be happy to make an introduction." "We have Goldman Sachs, thanks," I replied dryly. Of course, he nodded, clearly impressed despite himself. "It's just, well, I wish I could have been more involved. Offered some guidance. I do have 40 years of business experience. In insurance sales, Dad. Not in building a tech company." His face flushed. "Business principles are universal, Morgan. And I have connections that could have been useful to you." "Connections you're suddenly eager to share now that Bloomberg has validated my work?" Mom interjected again, her voice strained. "Morgan, that's not fair. Your father is just trying to help. Now. He's trying to help now. Where was this help when I was eating ramen for dinner every night and sleeping on a pull-out couch to save money for server costs? You never told us things were that difficult. Mom exclaimed. Because every time I mentioned any challenge, it turned into a lecture about how I should give up and get a real job. The tension in the air was palpable. Years of misunderstandings and hurt feelings were erupting all at once. Kyle, always the analyst, tried a different approach. I think what everyone is struggling with is the deception, Morgan. You actively led us to believe you were in a completely different situation than you actually were. It wasn't deception, I countered. It was privacy. Something my company specializes in. By the way, privacy from internet strangers is one thing, Allison said. Privacy from your own family is another. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, my family has been pretty quick to judge my choices at every turn. Allison's competitive nature flared. Oh, please. Not all of us had the luxury of following our passion. Some of us had responsibilities. Do you think I went through 10 years of medical training because it was fun? I did it because it was practical and secure. No one forced you to become a doctor, Allison. No, but some of us actually care about meeting our family's expectations. And there it was, the core of so much family tension over the years. The expectations. The predetermined paths. The unspoken but ever-present hierarchy of acceptable life choices. Dad stepped in, his voice carrying the authority he'd wielded throughout our childhood. That's enough. Morgan, I think you're being unfair. Everything we've ever done has been out of love and concern for your well-being. Something in me snapped. All the memories of dismissed dreams and undermined ambitions crystallized into a white-hot core of resentment. Was it concern when you told me my first business plan was cute, but not realistic? Was it love when you suggested I was too idealistic to succeed in tech? Was it supportive when you told your friends I was still figuring things out instead of saying I was building a company? My voice had risen to the edge of shouting, years of suppressed frustration pouring out. Do you have any idea how hard it is to believe in yourself when the people who are supposed to believe in you most are constantly waiting for you to fail? Do you know what that does to a person? The backyard fell silent except for the distant sound of a neighbor's sprinkler. My family stared at me, shocked by the outburst. I rarely lost my composure. A trait that had served me well as a CEO, but had perhaps concealed too much from the people closest to me. I need to be alone for a while, I said, turning away from their stunned faces. I walked to the old wooden swing set at the far end of the yard, the same one where I'd spent countless childhood hours dreaming about changing the world with technology someday. As I sat on the worn wooden swing, I heard the sliding door close as my family retreated inside, leaving me with my thoughts and the weight of 4 years of secrets finally exposed. The ancient swing creaked beneath me, protesting after years of disuse. I remembered my father installing it when I was 6 years old, meticulously following the instructions and double-checking every bolt. Safety and security, always his priorities. I pushed off gently with my feet, setting the swing in motion. This backyard had been my thinking space growing up. When I was 10, I'd sit here calculating how many pet-sitting jobs it would take to buy my first computer. At 16, I'd sketched out my first algorithm ideas, trying to create a program that could predict which college would be the best fit based on multiple variables. During my last year of college, I'd come out here during Christmas break to map out what would eventually become DataShield's core technology. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Rachel. Morgan, call me ASAP. Bloomberg article went live early. PR team scrambling. Need to coordinate response. I sighed, not ready to dive back into crisis management mode. Another text came through. Also, are you okay? I know you were doing family dinner tonight. Rachel knew all about my complicated family dynamics. As my co-founder and closest friend, she'd been there through every stage of building our company, including the personal toll it had taken on me to keep our success hidden from my family. I texted back, story broke during dinner. Family freaking out. We'll call in an hour. Setting my phone aside, I returned to the gentle rhythm of swinging, letting memories wash over me. I remembered the night Rachel and I had our first breakthrough. 3 months after founding the company. We'd been working for 20 hours straight, fueled by coffee and desperation, when the solution to our core technical challenge suddenly clicked into place. "Try it now," Rachel had said, her voice hoarse from exhaustion as she finished implementing our new approach. I ran the test sequence, holding my breath as the system processed. When the results appeared on screen, showing that our privacy protocol worked perfectly, we'd screamed and danced around the tiny apartment at 3 a.m., not caring if the neighbors complained. That moment had been the first of many milestones we'd celebrated privately. The day we landed our first major client. The morning our bank account showed the first seven-figure investment deposit. The afternoon we'd turned profitable, 18 months ahead of our business plan projections. For each success, I'd wanted to call my family and share the news. To hear pride in their voices and know they finally understood what I was building. Each time, I'd stopped myself, remembering the strategic importance of our stealth status and the sting of their past dismissals. Had I been fair to them? The question nagged at me as I swung higher. They hadn't believed in my vision, true. But they had believed in me in their own way, wanting security and stability for my life, the things they valued most. Was it right to resent them for not understanding a world so different from their own experience? The swing slowed as I considered my own role in our communication breakdown. I'd kept them at arm's length professionally for years before Data Shield. I'd stopped sharing my ambitions after too many well-meaning but deflating responses. Instead of trying to help them understand, I'd withdrawn, protecting my dreams by keeping them private. And now here we were, my success exposed in the most jarring way possible. Everyone hurt and confused, and years of unspoken feelings erupting all at once. My phone buzzed again. Rachel checking in. The PR team needing decisions. Investors likely calling. The Bloomberg article meant our carefully orchestrated IPO timeline was now compressed. We'd need to move quickly to control the narrative. But before I could be the CEO my company needed right now, I had to resolve things with my family. Not just for tonight, but for our relationship going forward. Success hadn't healed the wounds I'd carried since childhood. If anything, it had exposed them more clearly. I realized something that had eluded me through years of therapy. My drive to succeed had been fueled partly by a desire to prove my family wrong. That motivation had provided energy during the hardest times, pushing me forward when exhaustion and doubt crept in. But it was a hollow foundation for lasting fulfillment. Even now, with billions in company valuation validating my choices, I still felt that childhood need for their approval. The real challenge wasn't building a successful company. It was building a healthy relationship with my family despite our differences. It was accepting that they might never fully understand my world while still allowing them to be part of my life. It was recognizing their limitations without letting those limitations define my self-worth. As the swing came to a stop, I made a decision. I would be honest with my family, completely honest. Perhaps for the first time in years. I would acknowledge my part in our communication breakdown. I would set boundaries for their involvement in my business life going forward. Most importantly, I would try to understand their perspective, even as I asked them to understand mine. Standing up from the swing, I took a deep breath of the evening air, catching the familiar scent of Mom's rose garden and Dad's freshly mowed lawn. This place would always be part of me, just as these people would always be part of my story. It was time to write a new chapter in our family narrative, one with more honesty and mutual respect. With renewed clarity, I walked back toward the house, where the warm yellow light of the dining room spilled onto the patio, illuminating the silhouettes of my waiting family. As I slid open the glass door, the hushed conversation inside immediately ceased. My family sat around the dining table, lasagna congealed on their plates, their expressions a mixture of confusion, hurt, and curiosity. Dad had loosened his tie, a rare concession that showed his stress. Mom was nervously folding and refolding her napkin. Kyle was still researching on his phone, while Allison stared intensely at the table's wood grain. I took my seat again, feeling their eyes on me. The silence stretched uncomfortably until I finally broke it. I owe you all an apology. I began, surprising them with my opening. Not for building my company in stealth mode, that was a necessary business decision. but for not trusting you with the truth once that truth wouldn't harm Data Shield. Mom reached for my hand across the table. We just don't understand why, honey. We're your family. I nodded, acknowledging her hurt. The truth is complicated. Part of it was protecting our competitive advantage. We were developing technology that larger companies would have immediately tried to replicate or acquire if they'd known about it. Dad seemed to accept this reasoning, nodding slightly. But that's not the whole story, I continued, forcing myself to maintain eye contact despite the discomfort. The harder truth is that I didn't think you'd believe in my success, even if I told you about it. Our pattern for years has been that you expect me to fail and prepare contingency plans rather than supporting my vision. That's not true, Dad protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I asked gently. When I told you I was starting Data Shield, you said I was throwing my life away on a pipe dream. Those were your exact words. Dad fell silent, recognition flickering across his face. We were worried, Mom said. Starting a business is so risky, and we've seen so many young people get their hearts broken trying. I know your concerns came from love, I acknowledged. You wanted to protect me from disappointment. But what I needed wasn't protection, it was belief. Just once. I wanted to hear, if anyone can make this work, Morgan, it's you, instead of, have you considered what you'll do when this doesn't work out? Kyle shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I sent you those startup statistics because I thought they'd help you prepare better, not because I thought you'd fail. I know, I said. But imagine getting those articles every few months while you're working 18-hour days trying to beat impossible odds. It felt like you were just waiting for the moment you could say, I told you so. Allison, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. I think I get it, she said slowly. It's like when I was applying to medical schools and Uncle Frank kept sending me articles about doctor burnout and declining physician salaries. She shot a pointed look at our uncle. It didn't help. It just made me feel like he expected me to quit. Uncle Frank had the grace to look embarrassed. Exactly, I said, grateful for Allison's analogy. And after a while, it seemed easier to just not share what was happening with Data Shield. The company was thriving. I was fulfilled by my work. But every family conversation about my career felt like defending a decision you'd already judged as a mistake. We didn't know, Mom said softly. We didn't realize that's how our concern was coming across. I didn't tell you, I admitted. That's on me. I stopped trying to make you understand and just withdrew instead. I should have been more direct about what I needed from you. Dad cleared his throat, a signal that he was about to say something difficult. I'm not good at apologizing, Morgan. You know that. But I'm sorry if I made you feel like I didn't believe in you. The truth is, I've always been in awe of your intelligence. You were solving computer problems at 12 that I couldn't begin to understand. Maybe my worry came from feeling out of my depth with your world. His admission stunned me. My father. The family authority on everything, acknowledging he felt out of his depth with my work? It was a vulnerability I'd never expected to witness. The Bloomberg article says your company is built on a revolutionary privacy protocol, Kyle said, looking up from his phone. I've been trying to understand what that actually means. What does Data Shield actually do? It was perhaps the first time a family member had asked me directly about the substance of my work rather than when I'd get a real job or how I planned to pay my rent. The simple question nearly brought tears to my eyes. We've created a way for companies to analyze their data without actually seeing the individual information within it, I explained, falling into the simplified pitch I used with non-technical investors. Think of it like being able to know that the average age of your customers is 34 without ever seeing any specific customer's birth date. That doesn't sound possible, Allison said. But her tone was curious rather than dismissive. That's why we're valued at $4 billion, I said with a small smile. We solved a problem everyone thought was impossible. For the next 20 minutes, I explained Data Shield's core technology in terms my family could understand, answering their questions without the defensive edge that had characterized our past conversations. They asked about my role as CEO, about Rachel's contribution, about our company culture and future plans. For the first time, they were treating my company as a serious achievement rather than a temporary diversion from a proper career. I can't believe my little sister is going to ring the bell at the New York Stock Exchange, Kyle said, shaking his head in amazement. About that, I said, making a spontaneous decision. Would you all like to be there? Family is usually invited to the IPO ceremony. Mom's eyes widened. On the stock exchange floor? Really? Really, I confirmed. I'd like you to be part of this moment. We'd be honored, Dad said, his voice thick with emotion he rarely displayed. As the conversation continued, the atmosphere in the dining room transformed. The tension dissipated, replaced by a curious mixture of familial warmth and newfound respect. My parents asked thoughtful questions about my leadership philosophy. Allison shared stories about her practice's data privacy challenges, seeking my professional opinion. Kyle, ever the numbers guy, was fascinated by the financial aspects of taking a company public. For dessert, Mom brought out her famous apple pie, and we moved to the living room with coffee. The conversation flowed more naturally than it had in years, perhaps ever. We weren't just talking, we were connecting. Finding new ways to understand each other as the adults we had become rather than the family roles we'd been assigned. I'd really like to see where you work sometime, Mom said as she poured more coffee. If that's allowed. I'd love to give you a tour of our headquarters, I replied. Maybe after the IPO when things calm down a bit. Dad nodded thoughtfully. I'd like to meet this Rachel person too. She sounds remarkable. She is, I agreed. You'll meet her at the IPO. She's already planning to bring her whole family. The evening stretched long past the usual end time for family dinners. When I finally prepared to leave, the goodbyes were different, warmer, more genuine, tinged with a new mutual respect that felt both foreign and deeply right. As Dad walked me to my car, he paused in the driveway, hands in his pockets, looking suddenly older in the moonlight. I'm proud of you, Morgan, he said simply. Not because of the company valuation or the IPO, but because you built something meaningful on your own terms. That takes courage I'm not sure I've ever had. His words, the words I'd waited years to hear, washed over me like a healing balm. I hugged him tightly, feeling something shift and settle between us. Thank you, Dad, I whispered. That means everything. 6 months later, I stood on the platform of the New York Stock Exchange, surrounded by my family, Rachel, and our core team from Data Shield. The trading floor buzzed with energy below us, and financial news cameras captured every moment from multiple angles. This was it, the culmination of nearly 5 years of work, the official transformation of Data Shield from private startup to public company. My mother stood beside me, proudly wearing a small silver pin with our company logo. She'd had it custom-made for the occasion, a gesture that touched me deeply. Dad, unusually dapper in a new suit, couldn't stop telling anyone who would listen, that's my daughter, the founder. Kyle had become our unofficial family financial advisor, explaining the intricacies of the IPO process to our relatives with impressive accuracy. Allison had taken a rare day off from her practice to be here, her usual competitiveness replaced by genuine sisterly pride. 2 minutes to bell, the NYSE coordinator announced, positioning us for the ceremonial moment. Rachel squeezed my hand. We did it, she whispered, her eyes shining with the same mix of disbelief and triumph I felt. As the countdown began, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here, not just the building of Data Shield, but the rebuilding of my relationship with my family over the past 6 months. The days following the Bloomberg revelation had been chaotic. Our PR team had scrambled to take control of the narrative, accelerating our IPO timeline and managing the sudden flood of media attention. Through it all, my family had respected my boundaries, understanding when I couldn't answer calls immediately or had to cut visits short for emergency board meetings. More surprisingly, they had begun to take a genuine interest in understanding my world. Dad had subscribed to tech industry newsletters and regularly sent me thoughtful questions about privacy regulations. Mom had started a book club with her friends where they read about women in technology, proudly sharing insights from my daughter, the CEO, during discussions. Kyle had become something of a Data Shield evangelist in his accounting firm, explaining our technology's financial compliance benefits to colleagues. The most profound change, though, had been in our communication. Weekly family dinners had evolved from obligation to genuine connection. We'd established new patterns of interaction. They asked questions about my work with curiosity rather than concern, and I shared both successes and challenges without fear of judgment. My work with my therapist had been crucial to this transformation. "Your success didn't create the family tension," she'd pointed out during one session. "It just exposed patterns that were already there. Now you have the opportunity to establish healthier ones." 10 seconds, the coordinator called, bringing me back to the present moment. I placed my hand on the bell as cameras flashed around us. Rachel joined me, along with our early investors and board members. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The sound of the opening bell echoed through the exchange as ticker symbols began running across the boards, including our own, DSLD. Cheers erupted from our team, and confetti fell from above. I hugged Rachel tightly, both of us momentarily overwhelmed by the significance of what we'd accomplished. When I turned to my family, Mom was wiping away tears. Dad, rarely demonstrative, wrapped me in a bear hug that spoke volumes. Even Allison seemed genuinely moved, her usual composure briefly set aside. "I always knew you could do it," Dad whispered in my ear during our embrace, the kind of retrospective confidence that once would have irritated me but now just made me smile. The following hours were a whirlwind of interviews, congratulations, and watching our stock price climb steadily on its first day of trading. By closing bell, DataShield's market cap had exceeded our most optimistic projections, and Rachel and I were officially billionaires, at least on paper. That evening, we hosted a celebration dinner for family, early employees, and key investors at a rooftop restaurant overlooking Manhattan. Watching my parents chat comfortably with our lead venture capitalist while Kyle engaged our CTO in a surprisingly technical discussion about data architecture, I felt a sense of worlds colliding in the best possible way. "Penny for your thoughts," Rachel said, joining me at the railing where I'd stepped away for a moment of quiet reflection. "Just thinking about how much has changed," I replied. "Not just with the company, but with my family. 6 months ago, I couldn't imagine them in this world. Now look at them." Rachel nodded, watching my mother enthusiastically showing photos of me as a child to our bemused engineering team. "People can surprise you when you give them the chance," she said. "Your mom called me last week, you know. Wanted to make sure we had vegetarian options tonight for my sister." "She did?" I laughed, touched by the thoughtfulness. "Families are complicated," Rachel observed, "but they can evolve if you let them." In the months since the Bloomberg revelation, I'd learned that success hadn't automatically healed family wounds as I'd once imagined it would. Instead, it had created space for honest conversations and new understanding, but only because we'd all been willing to do the difficult work of communicating openly. I'd also discovered that my self-worth couldn't be built solely on professional achievements or family approval. True fulfillment came from integration, bringing together the different parts of my identity rather than compartmentalizing them. The weekly family dinners had become a sanctuary from the increasing pressures of running a public company. There, I wasn't Morgan Crawford, CEO, but simply Morgan, daughter, sister, family member. The boundaries I'd established were respected, business advice was offered only when requested, and conversations ranged far beyond DataShield. My therapist had helped me understand that my parents' fear had indeed masked love, a protective instinct that manifested as doubt but stemmed from caring. "They wanted to shield you from pain," she'd explained, "while you needed the freedom to risk failure on your own terms." Understanding this dynamic hadn't immediately fixed everything, but it had helped me approach family interactions with more compassion and less defensiveness. I'd stopped expecting perfect understanding and started appreciating their efforts to connect with my world, however imperfect. As dinner wound down and guests began to depart, my family gathered around me for a final toast. "To Morgan," Dad said, raising his glass, "who taught us all that sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one." "To DataShield," Kyle added, "may your stock price only go up." His joke earned laughter around the table. "To new beginnings," Mom said softly, "and family bonds that bend but don't break." Later that night, Alone in my hotel room overlooking the city lights, I sent a text to our company's Slack channel thanking the team for their extraordinary work in bringing us to this milestone. Then I opened my personal journal, a habit I'd maintained since childhood, and wrote, "IPO day. Dream accomplished." But the greater achievement might be finding a way to integrate all parts of my life, family, work, self, without sacrificing any of them. Success isn't just about valuations and stock prices. It's about building connections that sustain you through both triumphs and challenges. Today, I feel rich in ways no balance sheet could ever capture. Have you ever had family members doubt your dreams or choices, only to change their tune when you succeeded? What did you learn from that experience? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories about family dynamics, business challenges, and personal growth. Remember, sometimes the people who understand you least at the beginning of your journey can become your biggest supporters once they see your vision come to life. Thank you for listening to my story. And I hope it inspires you to pursue your dreams even when the people closest to you don't understand them yet.